to Motivators podcast, and today is our first episode, and we really want to just do real quick introductions. I'm Emaley McCulloch, VP of Clinical Products, my background in behavior analysis, and then I'm one of the hosts, and then I'm going to introduce the next host, and then the next host will introduce himself, and then I'm going to introduce our first guest.
Hi, everyone. My name is Brian Curley. I'm the Director of Product Marketing here at Motivity. I've been in the ABA market since about 2015, almost solely on the software side. And I'm here kind of to talk and listen and be a curious person that I always am. And hopefully, come up with some new ideas and learn a lot about Ashton. And yeah, it should be great.
Yeah, we're starting with a bang here on our first episode with Ashton Benedickt. Thank you so much for being our first guest on our podcast. And I want to just do a quick introduction, and then we'll have Ashton also talk a little bit about her background. So Ashton Benedickt is a board-certified behavior analyst and executive advisor at clinical operations at the Center for Applied Behavior Analysis, or CABA, and also is an adjunct professor and researcher with a Master's of Science in Psychology. Her primary areas of training are functional analysis, severe or high risk behaviors, acceptance and commitment therapy, and experimental design. In addition to serving the autistic population as a neurodiversity consultant, Ashton also carries a diagnosis of autism, PTSD, and OCD. All right, thanks so much again for being our first guest, and love to just have you tell a little about yourself and your background.
Thank you for having me. Yes, I'm Ashton, and I am autistic, and I have all those other diagnoses. And I know that sometimes my neurotypical friends can kind of cringe a little bit for me when I disclose diagnoses outside of the one that I need to disclose for why I'm, doing my advocacy work within autism. But I think it's important because I am a diversity trainer. And I think it's important for people to not only know like the privileges that I experience as a cisgender white female in having all these opportunities, but also the ways that make me uniquely qualified to speak about some of the more nuanced areas of our clients' needs. So thank you for the introduction. I work at the Center for Applied Behavior Analysis in California, and we have offices down in Los Angeles. We have a branch that I developed and launched myself in the Tri-Counties area, which is like the Ventura County, Santa Barbara area. And then we also have a branch up in Northern California, which I also helped launch and initially develop. Mm-hmm.
Oh, I didn't realize that. That's awesome.
Yeah. And I've been living in California on and off for since about 2009. So I really like it here. I'm originally from Florida.
Oh, another state with a lot of behavior analysts. Yeah.
Yes. Somewhat different perspectives though. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, for sure. I've noticed that too. Great. One of the things that I think that is super interesting about Ashton is also just the diversity of her background and experience. I guess, do you want to tell a little bit about like your professional life and how you kind of came into the field? And yeah, I mean, I've heard you gave me a little bit of sneak peek about some of the early scientific discoveries or some of the scientific work you've done, and it was super interesting. Would you like to share some of that?
Yeah, so I actually, even when I was, a small child, like even through when I was in elementary school, I was always, I'm autistic. So I always had a little bit of trouble like fitting in and understanding why I fit in. People were really fascinating to me. You could say that that's my trains or like my special interest is people and their behavior. And it is also a survival technique for me to understand people because I don't naturally fit in in every situation and environment that I go into. So even as a child, I was very fascinated by psychology. And my mom was actually in college when I was little, and she would take me to college with her. So I got to actually attend college courses in psychology as a small child.
Oh,
And
wow.
it just, yeah, and it really excited me. So then obviously once I, graduated high school and all of that, I got into clinical psychology is kind of where I started. And then my husband and I, before we were married, we were living in Santa Barbara, and you know how it is when you first start dating someone and you just want to like be attached to them. And in order to afford living in Santa Barbara, we both had like 3 different jobs,
Yeah.
and we never got to see each other. So we were just like, I think it was after like a night at a bar or something. We were kind of tipsy, and we were like, what if we just moved to an island together? And we try that. And my husband's actually a predator biologist. So he started Googling predator biology jobs on different university websites. And we found the University of Washington's Behavioral Avian Ecology program was looking for a predator biologist. It was on a very tiny island in Micronesia, 3 by 10 mile island called Rhoda. There's no traffic lights.
Oh.
And no hot water heaters.
Oh my gosh.
And very minimal grocery options. And so we moved there together, and I was working originally as a special education teacher and ESL teacher. And then my husband, he was doing his biology work. They needed additional help. So I got to do some volunteer work with that program. Primarily what that program was looking at, they were actually using ABA techniques in order to study the breeding habits and nesting habits of the endangered aga, which is just the Chamorro word, or the native word for people in the Northern Mariana Islands, for crow. And that crow is endangered. So they have like a captive breeding program, and they have a program there where they're monitoring their breeding habits and mating habits. And one of the other things that we did while we were there that was really cool is I was paid to be a gecko hunter. So the captive birds needed food, and I was very good at catching geckos. So I would go out into the jungle at night with my headlamp on and be a paid gecko trainer. And they were paying me, I think, like 10 cents a gram for geckos. So
Oh
it's
my
pretty
God.
and monitoring nests and checking trail cams and stuff like that. It was pretty awesome. And we also, while we were there, got to work with NOAA's sea turtle research project, and I got to learn how to the islanders from Palau actually used to hunt the sea turtles and make like a ceremonial soup out of them. But once they came into contact with some of the NOAA researchers, and they understood that they were endangered and what they were trying to do to protect them, they actually taught the scientists how to use their old hunting techniques for how to like silently like lower yourself in the water to like grab the turtle by the carapace and like bring it up. And it was a very cool experience. But
Wow.
oddly, that was my introduction to behavior analysis. And
That
then
is so unique. Wow.
yeah. And then I went to Florida, and that was the only job I could get after coming back from the island and going back to my home state of Florida, the only job I could get using my psychology degree at the time, which was just a bachelor's degree, was as an ABA therapist and as a special education like teaching assistant. And I started both of those jobs at the same time. And while doing that, I met my first ABA client, and she was primarily non-speaking. She was engaging in, I think, SIB every minute, to the point of like making her hand bleed. She wasn't even making like vocalization sounds. And so she had been like removed from her speech therapy class. And of course, like her mom was beside herself. And this was my first client as a, this is before RBT was even a thing. So as a, behavior therapist. And it was really cool because I was learning from the BCBA that I was with, and she had brought out the VD map, and she had explained to me like how we were gonna isolate the skills and shape the behavior. So like I started out by just, trying to, we did functional assessment and we realized that the SIB was maintained by mom's attention. So then it became really, really easy to come up with a replacement behavior. And we shaped it. And I think after like the first 6-month update, she was already up to like 4 words and 50 signs, and she wasn't injuring herself anymore. And I was like, okay, I think I'm going to change my major to ABA because this is amazing. Like I was like, oh, this is like what happened. I can see it. And it was just so reinforcing. And that's just one example. That was like a lot of my first initial interactions with ABA were very much like that one.
Wow. Was that your first exposure to ABA? Like that first client, was that your first
well, technically, I guess it would be my first exposure to ABA where I knew that that's what it was.
That's what it was.
But keep in mind, I was also I was in special education, in my elementary school classes and middle school classes. So, and I also volunteered in what would be considered the special needs rooms that where clients or students were more impacted than I was. I volunteered in those classes as well. But back then they didn't call it ABA, they called it like behavior modification, I think. And it looked very different.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And even, I had a behavior plan and I had OT and I had, a lot of the same things that our clients have. I think people would be surprised to know that I also had. So I guess technically, yeah, formally it was my first, but yeah. And then from there, I really just fell in love, and then I started noticing things, right? Because then I became really obsessed. Like literally, as soon as my Cooper book came in, before I even started my first class in ABA, I read the entire thing, like front to back, because it made so much sense to me, because there's a lot of subjectivity in like clinical psychology that I was always kind of frustrated with, that it wasn't there. And then it came into an issue where I was working for a BCBA and in school learning from BCBAs who were telling me things like, nobody does functional analysis, don't worry about that. No, you don't need to learn how to do a standard acceleration. Nobody uses that in the field. And I saw this like real at an early stage, and now we're seeing the effects of this much more developed, but at an early stage I started seeing a drift from our science in order to kind of meet the medical model so that we could get funded and maintain funding. And I became very concerned, and I started voicing these concerns. And as you can imagine, and just by the way, that happens to autistic people a lot. So one of the problems with us maintaining our employment is that we cannot separate our behavior from our values a lot of times. So like, whereas a neurotypical person might be able to engage in higher degrees of masking their own dissatisfaction with a situation, if an autistic person, we have a very strong sense of justice. So it becomes we already have to mask. And then if we feel injustice, I've been through quite a few jobs because of this. And my professor, as I'm talking to my ethics professor, Dr. Julianne Lastly, about this, she was telling me like, you cite Dr. Rachel Taylor a lot in your work, and I know her well. Like, why don't I connect you? Maybe you should go back to California. It's like, okay. So I called Rachel, and it was cool because it was supposed to be just like a 30-minute, I think, interview. And we were on the phone for like 2 hours, and I was like pacing in my house and hand flapping because I was so excited. And Dr. Lastly told me the reason why she knew I would do well with Rachel is because Rachel really valued people like me, like really valued people that were willing to like stand up and say like, hey, that's not in alignment with our science. We like prioritize this, and we need to prioritize the client. So that was pretty cool. And then I got to come and help Rachel launch her LA office and then her San Francisco office.
I love it. Your passion reminds me so much of Dr. Rachel Taylor, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it
Yeah.
seems like it aligns perfectly, right? Like if you want to keep a certain level, a clinical standard, right, at your practice, that seems like that aligns so perfectly, right?
Yeah.
So that's great that you're able to find someone that found that really valuable.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's I don't think that a lot of times when other autistic people are reaching out to me for support in their career or whatnot, that's one of the first things I tell them. You need to find someone who gets it, find someone who understands like your autistic rage and your autistic sense of justice, and who will help you channel that into productivity and actually like making the changes in the field that we need to see, and not even in our field. The changes for autistic people need to happen across every field. Apparently when I'm talking to other autistics, it's not just ours.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I love that, well, the way you were talking about, special interests and your autism, because that is something that is, it's interesting to me that your special interest has turned is people. And because I think that's pretty unique from my experience with working with individuals on the spectrum, and that special interest of people like kind of navigated you towards the science of behavior, and then how you're using that. And I think that that I just think that resonates a lot with the way that autistic people kind of can find success in their lives, like finding that special interest and then how that's going to manifest.
Yeah, and I mean that's kind of I think it's really important for well I will say a lot of my autistic peers, which I mean this is a biased population sample because they're my friends, are also their special interest is also people. In general, from my understanding, a lot of autistic individuals are super interested in psychology, and also another really common interest is animals. And I think that there's like a lot of really cool ways that you can, when you're working with a client, where you can kind of figure out what their thing is and find a way to help incorporate that into their life and use it for like motivational purposes. For example, one time I went to go do an assessment for a client who was he was very large. I'm 5'2" and he is like 6 foot something. And he was referred to us due to severe aggression, like hospitalizing people aggression, including his own caregivers. So I was a little nervous when I went to meet him, obviously, but this is what I do. It's what I specialize in. And when I got there, one of the first things I noticed was movie posters everywhere, just everywhere. And so one of the first like things that I did in his assessment was like probe the extent of that interest, and then see like maybe some different skills that about that interest that he could apply. And he was really good at like categorizing things and color coding things. So eventually I was able to actually get him set up with a manager at a movie theater who hired him, and he got to work, and he's still working there. And
so
that's just
cool.
like one example. But yeah, I think anytime you can, and that's not just for autistic people, that's any person. If you can find, what you're passionate about that also helps the world, then that's what you should do.
Right. Yeah. And this month is April. Currently right now it's an autism acceptance month. I know you've been super busy this month. I've seen like been invited to. So I guess what is this as a autistic person and a clinician, what has this month kind of meant to you? How does it, I guess it used to be Autism Awareness Month, and it's kind of transformed in some circles to Autism Acceptance Month.
So, well, for me, I think we need both, right? Like we need autism acceptance and autism awareness. And I think when the big push for awareness happened, we needed that push. We needed that kind of like shift in the narrative. But now we're kind of at a place where we need to make space for both. So we're at a different spot in the movement. And so I think it's okay to use them interchangeably. I do, depending on kind of what my focus is. But yeah, this month has been really interesting. I think it's kind of a mixture of overwhelm and excitement. I'm always really hopeful. I feel like every year, every April, I see more and more autistic people being centered, more and more autistic people being shared by others, and even when I'm hearing, certain neurotypical clinicians speak, I now know that they're talking to autistic people. I can tell by the way, even if they're not outright saying it, I can tell that they're getting neurodiversity training, that they're slowly changing the way that they're talking. And that's my whole goal in all of this, is to really build this movement up so that it can help transform, services for autistic people.
Yeah, I know. I've noticed that too every year, and I'm so glad that this is becoming organizations, like the organizations that are supporting families and autistic people. I'm seeing that they are giving more voice to individuals on the spectrum. And I guess, do you feel like there's additional growth needed in autism acceptance, and where do you think we should focus our efforts moving forward?
Yeah, I definitely think there's always in any situation that you're in, there's always room for growth. And I think nothing, so I was in I was at an invited talk earlier this week, and one of the audience members asked, they asked if I really believed that ABA could be reformed based off of an earlier comment that I had said. And if they said, could it really be reformed to be 100% neurodiversity affirming or trauma informed? And I said, no, and we shouldn't strive for that, because anytime you try to have humans do anything at 100%, what you end up doing is creating a system by which there's no avenue to grow or learn. And if you don't actively cringe at things that you did even just yesterday because you've now learned something new, then you're not growing and you're not learning and you're not being a good scientist. You're not being a good behavior analyst. So yeah, I just think it's important to yes, there's still lots of room for growth. And I do think that there's a lot of progress. I think a big area right now that needs to be prioritized is some of the funding that's going into different educational programs and health initiatives and things like that. I am friends with quite a bit of autistic people that are outside of, they're not necessarily as involved in the ABA reform movement, because their part of the neurodiversity movement is focused on a different, area. Mm-hmm. And some of my friends are super focused on reforms in healthcare. A lot of autistic people, including myself, have a lot of trouble in hospital settings. I actively avoid medical care that I need because of how triggered I become in a hospital. And then also I'm a professional, right? So if I become triggered in a hospital setting to the point where somebody deems me mentally unstable, I may get 5150, and that might put my certification at jeopardy, even if only temporarily. So I think that there's a lot of nuance to the changes that need to happen, but I definitely think we're moving in the right direction.
Yeah. Now, Ashton and I, and Brian, we know each other through Motivity. Ashton's organization CABA uses Motivity, and I know Ashton was actually a pivotal part of that. Do you want to share that story? And then I had some follow-up questions about some of the work you're doing, and then maybe you could even give us a teaser for your CE webinar that is going to be provided or going to be coming up this May. Yeah, so tell us, how did you, I guess, first maybe tell us about how you heard about Motivity, and then how you're using data collection to support your work on neurodiversity affirming care?
Yeah. So I was actually at CABA Long Beach a few iterations ago. So like pre-pandemic
Mhm.
conference times. And I had just left one company and hadn't started another company yet. And because of my autistic sense of justice and needing to leave companies due to ethical concerns or concerns about neurodiversity affirming care, I was just like, I'm just going to start my own company, I guess. So when I was going through all the booths at CABA, I was doing it as like, look, I was like, okay, I guess I need liability insurance. I need this. I had talked to a couple of my friends that had started their own companies, and they had told me who I needed to talk to. And I think it's Brian actually that I talked to, right? Was it you?
It could have been.
I'm really bad with names. It was a dude and he was nice. So maybe it was you. And anyway,
there's not too many of us.
Was he also handsome? There you go.
When was it? 2021?
I don't know. When was Long Beach CABA? The last one, not the most recent one. It couldn't have been 2021. It was 20. It had to be like 2018 or 2019.
No, it wasn't me. It had to be Rex.
Okay.
Yeah, we look the same.
Well, so anywho, I met
another handsome fella.
And he was pretty chill, and he was super explanatory about how Motivity worked. And what he showed me during the thing was kind of like, at the time, like so different than any of the other softwares that I had access to. And remember, I had been working at a lot of companies.
I think that was the old version, right? To where you could write your own code, write your own script.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But actually the part that I thought was super cool was that I could log into my client sessions live and watch how the data was being collected, because even on some of the other practice platforms, you can log in live to the session, but you don't necessarily see the data accumulating in the same way. I'm not a software person, so I'm sure there's somebody else in a room somewhere saying like, I know what she's talking about. That's not me. But anyway, I was super impressed, and I was like, okay, so I guess this is the one that I need. And also I really liked the way it looked. I think that's something that's super important for something you're going to be using every day. And but then I ended up actually coming back to CABA. And when I got here, they were still doing pencil and paper and, physical binders. And I, obviously wanted to get us over to, an electronically based data collection platform. And the pandemic was starting. So we were doing a big transition to telehealth. So it was like really perfect timing.
Yeah, it's perfect.
And then I guess one of the things that I do with Motivity that's probably a little bit unique, that's related to neurodiversity affirming care that I'll be talking about a lot more in the webinar, is that I actually have a very specific way that I program for caregivers. At CABA, we have what we call the RDA, or like the risk-driven approach. And in my opinion, the RDA is kind of the tool that I find most useful to kind of bridge the gap between our science of radical behaviorism and like the discrepancies with making that kind of fit into the medical model, right? Because our science is not focused on reducing symptoms. We're taught we don't even need to know what their diagnosis is. We need to focus on, manipulating independent variables in their environment so that we can improve their quality of life. And then you've got the medical model over here saying like, they're sick, reduce their symptoms, cure. And even though we all know that we don't talk about a cure anymore, we still program that way, or we're still a lot of the times required to program that way. So anywho, I use the RDA assessment process in order to design my clients' goals. And what ends up coming out of that is that a lot of times my caregivers get behavior reduction goals. So they may have behavior reduction goals for how many times they're interrupting, how many times they're in making invalidating statements. They have behavior reduction goals for all kinds of things, as well as skill acquisition goals, but not just your kind of standardized caregiver goals that you see a lot of people throwing in there because it's a requirement. I actually individualize my caregiver goals super specific.
And they know about these?
Yeah, they do.
How do they,
and
how do
not
they
all of
take
them.
to that?
I think I have in some ways, I have a very unfortunate experience of being as unique as I am. And in some ways, I think it benefits me in that I think because I'm autistic and because I just tell everyone all the time, they don't necessarily take things as personally. Like they know they can trust me. I'm not hiding a motive. I'm not hiding an opinion about you. If I think something, I'm going to say it. And so I think in general, even though it makes parents uncomfortable, they tend to trust me. I'll sit with them in that uncomfortability. I will sit with them, and there's been several times with caregivers that I've been like, hey, look, I know as a mother this seems counterintuitive, and I do the same thing, but trust me, we need to do it a different way, and here's why. And I think it's just about that. Yeah.
So this, like, you keep coming back to like your thoughts around justice, and that you have to like push this point all the time, right? Like, and it's because it's deep within you. You don't know why, you just have this feeling, right, that you're like, this is it.
Yeah.
And I think for someone like myself, that is scary because I could be wrong.
Yeah.
Right? Do you ever get that feeling?
Like, do I feel like I could be wrong about my opinion or my thought or my analysis?
Yeah, because like, like, or maybe like when you were learning something, right, you got taught it a certain way, so maybe that's ingrained in you. Are there ever those, like, do you ever get that of like, well, because that's like the first thing that comes into my mind is why I don't talk. It's because I'm like, I could be wrong, which that's probably a negative, right? Because I don't stand up for what I really believe.
I don't think I have. I mean, I definitely, as a scientist, and actually Rachel says that one of her favorite things about me is how self-aware I am. That was my next question. Yeah. My first thing in any situation, and this is probably also a product of my PTSD, but it works out well for me in my managerial style and my supervision style, because anytime anybody comes with me with any kind of problem or disagreement or anything negative, my first reaction is, what have I done wrong? But not in like I don't shut down from that, because I have such a reinforcement history of seeing something I've done wrong, listening to the person, changing my behavior, learning from that, and then doing better next time. I don't get as nervous about it because I think because I'm not as concerned as a neurotypical person about how I'm viewed, or like, I don't get so caught up in like my identity as like a clinician. It's easier for me to be more receptive from feedback, which then inherently makes me learn better from it. Yeah.
You get a nice, like, you juggle the two.
Yeah.
Do you have any like routines or anything that you do for that self-awareness that like?
No. I mean, I very much am a proponent of, acceptance and commitment therapy. And I think a lot of the conceptualization around like the skills that I've been able to develop for myself as an autistic professional trying to exist in a world that was not designed for me. I think a lot of them, even if as I was developing them, happened before I understood acceptance and commitment therapy, a lot of them are like super in alignment. So then once I was exposed to acceptance and commitment therapy, kind of the same way once I was exposed to ABA, I was like, it was like somebody gave me, like, I literally have.
Wow.
You're not. Oh, sorry, you're not close to the mic, so we couldn't hear what you just said. What did you say?
I have the 4-term contingency tattooed on my arm. And it is literally the algorithm of human behavior. So like,
cool.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's because it like, from everything that you're saying, especially if I was someone who wanted to be hiring someone, you seem like that, like all of these different traits come together as like the perfect employee.
Yeah.
because it's like
Well,
I get to like say like, okay, this is how we do things here, and you go, I've done them a little differently, and I said, okay, that's a great idea, and you just take off. And then when something needs to be changed, we talk about it, and then you just take off, keep doing the new thing. It's like, wow, this is amazing, you know?
Yeah.
And that's really great.
yeah, I think there's a lot of, there's a lot of I don't know if I can say this word on your podcast, and I don't mean it in a lewd way, so I'm going to say it if you need to later.
We'll bleep it out if it's bad. Don't worry.
There's a term that so you know how like, or maybe you don't know, so I'm gonna take us on a little detour. In intersectional feminism, one of the tropes that's talked about in media a lot is the manic pixie dream girl trope. Do y'all know what I'm talking about?
No.
Okay, so it's like the trope where I'm trying to think of an example. Have you seen Garden State or Elizabethtown, or it's where the female character is literally just designed in order to be quirky and weird, and make the main character, the male, have some type of epiphany about his life and help him kind of become a better person. So like her entire identity is used to
like
kind
supportive.
of show a character arc of a male character, right? And a lot of times you can look at autistic people kind of in that same light, but with an added how we get described in different like stigmatizations and tropes about us in the media. And then what kind of ends up happening from that is what you have this like dichotomy where you've got what we call inspiration porn, which is where you've got an autistic person or any kind of disabled person like, look, Johnny finally got a job and he's, putting stamps on the mail room, or he's working in a factory and all that. And they're like, look at him, he's doing so great. And it's, people will repost it, and we call it inspiration because it makes neurotypical people feel better about our existence. However, you take someone like me, yes, I was in special education, and if you knew all the ways that my autism affects me, you'd be really surprised, just like my doctors are, that I'm even able to maintain a job. And you can't I scare those people because I'm not as inspirational, right? I'm not as cool because I'm a threat. And I'm not just a threat because I could take your job. I'm a threat because I'm trying to change systems that keep you in power. So yeah. I don't know if I answered that question the right way. Yeah. I kind of went on a tangent there, but that's where my mind went. So
yeah, whenever I hear you speak or talk to you, like it's like light bulbs turn on, because there's so many things I've never thought about. I mean, I've worked with many people with autism, and I have a son on the spectrum, and I'm still learning all the time. Like, oh, I'm going to think about it that way. Yeah, that was really interesting. I never thought of that. What did you call it? The
manic pixie dream girl trope. But with autism, it's like manic pixie autism trope, but then neurotypicals get also the added benefit of like using us for sympathy. There's like a touch of Munchausen by proxy in there.
Yeah. Well, very cool. Well, so yes, so those of you listening who would like to learn more about neurodiversity affirming care and how to work with caregivers and I even just building awareness of that. Like, for example, myself, in my professional life and in my as a parent, a lot of times I would not realize like my son was listening because he seemed so so attentive to what he was doing. So a lot of times I would talk with the professionals about his treatment or like behaviors, or like with him, like in the room, thinking he wasn't listening or couldn't hear me. But then realizing later when he brought it up down the road, even like months or years later, oh, remember you said this? And I was like, oh my gosh, he could hear all of what we were saying. And, that's something that I think as a parent and practitioner, I've learned a lot about being aware of neurodiversity affirming care, changing our own behaviors to encourage and uplift individuals that are neurodiverse. So I think a lot of these things you're going to be talking about in the webinar coming up next month. I'm super excited to attend that one to learn even myself, but also how to track that and how to have the parents like take like self-report and take data on their own behavior and be more aware.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure. I was like, oh, I want to tell you something. I'm like, oh, maybe I should save that for the webinar. I don't know.
No, tell it. What is it?
I was gonna say just like I can tell you like one cool activity that I do with caregivers, and I actually learned it from one of my RBTs who I think was at Pepperdine in a MFT program. And she had it as a requirement from her professor, and now I require it of my students, and I do it with my caregivers and a lot of different people. But and I'm gonna have to probably send you the link, but it's called, I think it's called a Jorai window. I always pronounce it incorrectly, but I can link it so that if anybody that's listening or watching wants to do this. But essentially it's this really cool website that you make your own kind of like, it's like almost like back in the day, like how you had a MySpace, like you get your own URL, but it's really low tech, and you make like your profile, and essentially you get a list of like, I think it's like 200 different adjectives that can describe people's characteristics or personality traits. And from this list of 200, you pick 5 that you think fit with you or describe you most accurately. Then you take this link that's now yours and you send it to everyone you know. Okay. And people can either respond anonymously or they can tell you who they are. But then they go and they take that list and they also pick 5 personality traits or characteristics that they think describe you best. And from there, when everybody's done, it generates like a graph for you, and it shows you what's called your like facade. So these are things that that you see in yourself that other people do not. And then there's I can't remember the labels for every, but there's also a section that shows you where the most agreement is amongst all the people that you polled, and also where the most discrepancies are. And it's really interesting. And where I go from that is that I have, keep in mind, there's 2 versions. There's a light version and a dark trait version. So depending on caregivers' level of comfortability, I can make them do both. And a lot of times once they've done the light one, they're like, okay, let's do it. I want to see. And actually that's kind of where I start my values training, because as much as neurotypicals like to say they don't care what other people think and they do things for other like more and like different types of motivation that aren't social, y'all are very socially motivated. Yeah. And you do care what people think about you, and you do care about what people think about your kids. And a lot of times that influences your parenting, whether you realize it or not. So when you can help parents kind of really, instead of shaming themselves for caring, understand why they care and how to change their behavior to like actually match the parent that they want to be, right? Sometimes I have them do things like, okay, imagine. Like if it's a younger kid, like you have a 5-year-old, okay, imagine he's 23 and he's come home for his first Thanksgiving with his girlfriend, and his girlfriend asks you, what kind of mom were you? How did you raise him? What was it like raising him? What kind of relationship did you guys have? What do you hope that you could tell her? You know, like it's putting things in perspective. And I think that's a really cool thing that I get to do as a clinician, because I've been in this field for over 10 years and I've seen kids at every stage. I've worked with geriatric clients and I've seen autism across the entire lifespan. And so I can help caregivers really put into perspective things that they may be having trouble processing.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I was reading something the other day and it asked us a question that was more about like life direction and things like that, and it asked kind of the same question you did, which was, what would you be doing if no one was to ever judge you? You know, what would you do in life if there was 0 judgment and no one knew, you know? And your answer is usually much different than what you're doing now or what you want to be doing and things like that. And I think that kind of aligns a little bit there. And Yeah, I think the social aspect is really interesting because that's completely changed since I think we all grew up.
Yeah.
You know, I was talking with a friend of mine last night, and she has a daughter who's 16 years old, and we were both just talking like, I can't even imagine being 16 years old growing up right now with
No.
TikTok and all these other different points of communication, right? That they're so much more connected than we ever were, right?
Yeah.
And as much as they could be sitting in their bedroom playing video games, they're talking constantly to their peers.
Yeah.
You know, and it's incredible. I can't
Yeah,
even
and
imagine.
I think it's something to think about too. A lot of people are worried about the kids. A lot of people are worried about Gen Z, and I think that something is we should be worried about them. And a lot of times, the narrative is about like TikTok and about all of this. But think about it this way. I follow, actually, this isn't my original thought process. This spiel I'm about to go on is from a clinical psychologist I follow on TikTok who works specifically with Gen Z. And her research is all about Gen Z. And what she's pointing out is really interesting. She's saying, think about your parents when they were teenagers, or when they were adolescents. If someone asked them, are you excited about becoming an adult? What are you looking forward to? They would probably say, most of them would probably say, yes, they're looking forward to college. They're looking forward to being able to buy a house. They're going to get married. They're going to have kids. But Gen Z isn't excited. That's why their humor is related to death. That's why they're so morbid, because the state of the world is a much different place. Will they be able to afford to go to college? Will they be able to, you know? So I think when we're looking at Gen Z, we really need to make sure we're understanding that they have a pretty hard road ahead of them, even harder than, you know, millennials have had.
Yeah, I think they also, though, on the contrary to that, like in a positive light, is I think if you were to ask our parents when they were teenagers, you know, why are they sad or why are they depressed or something about their feelings, you know, they wouldn't even know how to respond.
Right.
But now all this Gen Z, like they know, oh, well, I do meditation in the morning and I know how to do all these things. And it's like, wait a second, like there's so much more in tune to what's
I'm going
on.
to therapy. Yeah, there's
I'm
more
going to therapy,
acceptance of
right? It's like,
therapy.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's totally different. It's totally different. So I think that's a huge positive, right? That they're at least in tune to what's going on.
Yeah,
right?
I didn't mean to be all doom and gloom about them. I just get defensive about them.
No,
but
I don't
in
think it's
general,
all negative.
I'm
for sure.
stoked about Gen Z.
Yeah.
I mean, one of my favorite activities is teaching. I love seeing what this next generation is going to do. It's really exciting. And I think that they, you know, there's like a running, like, you know, kind of social narrative saying that like millennials are kind of like looking at Gen Z as like we saw the problem and we tried to make the change and we couldn't, but here comes our kids and it's going to be really cool.
Yeah. And then bringing it back to our earlier conversation, this generation, what I'm excited about, I almost get emotional about it. So what I'm excited about is that when I entered this field, it was very focused on, like, the organizations that are out there were very kind of almost making autism the enemy. So there was like defeat autism now. Cure autism now. Those were two legitimate like organizations, right? And I actually, as a teenager, did hosted a fundraiser for them, and you know, and then went to these events and listened to these stories about, you know, how autism was destroying their family, and I always felt like a little bit like uncomfortable with that whole narrative. Especially when I got to know these individuals, and I'm just so happy that it's changing, and it's this new generation. It's the new generation that's changed. Like, this new generation is the most accepting generation that we've had so far. And and you're a part of that, and I'm so grateful that you are in this field and that you're fighting the good fight. And
thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks again for your time today, and we are looking forward to next month.
Okay.
We'll talk to you.
Yeah, it'll be great. Yeah. Super excited for the webinar.
Yeah, thanks guys for having me.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Ashton.
thanks for being our first guest.